Yeah, on the same day, I'm still continuing with um, this text, which is called Human Origins. It's an anthology from 2017. I'm looking at chapter 2 by an anthropologist named Roy Allen, and I'm trying to answer the question, or let's say, trying to answer the question, what is it about, what is it about our humanness? What's the core of our humanity? By looking at this intersection of these biological Darwinian timelines and modern ethnography. So this period in our development that our um, the key parts of our humanness, human culture, really came online. And what we've sort of honed in on is the capacity for our social our being together in groups, and for the collective intelligence and distributed cognition of those groups to reorganize category boundaries. And so it's not only this capacity to store social knowledge and to transmit that knowledge intergenerationally, but to draw to classify nature in different ways. So to reorganize knowledge, and had to do with the and a kind of emergent morality that had to do with recognizing the agency and intentionality in another, and so being able to trust that that other has some knowledge that can be valuable to the group. This is the basis of sharing natural knowledge socially. And so this way that humans have of not only deriving knowledge from nature, but also organizing that knowledge socially goes along with this co-emergent morality, the sense of agency by empathic connection with the other, the trust of that other, and the sharing of knowledge that ultimately leads to better success as a group. What we're wanting to do here is hone in a little bit more of how did we, what is it about the sharing of knowledge? So if the core of our humanity here is about not only gathering knowledge, but reorganizing it into these emergent patterns that have some cross-cultural validity, well, how do we do that knowledge sharing? And moreover, after we've shared that knowledge, how is it stored by the social group? And this is how I get into the next section in this essay, this chapter of Roy Ellen's, which is called Episodic and Mimetic Memory. And again, I'm still using this rather tortured methodology of reading out the paragraphs and then commenting on them. What we're trying to answer here is the question of when we derive our natural knowledge from the world, literally our knowledge of like plants and animals and how to work with them and how to classify them, what things are and what they're useful for, and so on. How do we do that? How do we share that information and store that information with each other? And so it says, key to understanding the growth in human sharing is the relationship between episodic and mimetic memory. Memory based on remembering occasions in the past when significant events occurred, and remembering general principles distilled from what may have occurred on one or more occasions. Okay, so literally pausing right there. We can see how if we're talking about just like relaying an episode, like, hey, I went out today into the world and this is what happened. If we have to remember like individual episodes every time, this is going to become really exhausting. It's going to be a lot of effort and energy to try and remember those things. Or what we could do is derive the gist. Like, what's the gist? Okay, like you went out on this adventure today, Sam. What did you learn? Well, here's the gist. And this is this distillation. It's a mimetic kind of memory. We don't remember all of the details of what someone experienced. We remember the general principles distilled from one or more occasions. I would say that those general principles, those are archetypes, to bring you more Jungian flavor. We can also see how when someone shares an episode from their um, adventures, we can feel how it fits in to these general principles that we know. Like there's a kind of resonance that occurs when someone's individual story aligns with what is a shared story. It goes on. It is sometimes supposed that there was a shift from cultural accumulation and transmission based predominantly on the first to one. Sorry, it says it's a very complex sentence. I'm trying to work out what it means. It says, it is sometimes supposed that there was a shift from cultural accumulation and transmission based predominantly on the first, as in episodic memory. There's a shift from that to one predominantly based on the second, namely archetypal memory, I'm going to call, or remembering these general principles. I'm just calling that archetypal memory. Okay, so this would imply, what this is saying is that this would imply that it's humans uniquely have this archetypal memory and other species, namely, yeah, non-human species, they can't do that. They just remember individual episodes. But then it says, but the assumption that non-human animals have episodic recall, in the sense described, has been challenged, and the term episode-like may be preferable. Whether or not non-human animals have temporal processing or can recall events, they're able to associate particular contexts with experiences. In terms of plant knowledge, episodic-like memory provides a basis for distinguishing predator from non-predator, toxic from non-toxic, fermented from non-fermented matter, for storing plant foods, and for distinguishing medicinal plants. But only mimetic memory, or archetypal memory, I'm calling, only mimetic memory would have permitted the more abstract grouping of plants and animals necessary for sharing large numbers of types of biota among larger numbers of individuals. Okay, again, very complex paragraph. A lot of information was presented. What's the gist? What's the gist of the paragraph? It's pointing out that we not only remember specific episodes from our own history, we not only have personal individual stories about the world, about life, but we remember in this general way. We remember these distilled principles, the essence, the gist of the story. It's what they're calling mimetic memory, what I'm calling archetypal memory. And it seems that that kind of memory and memorization is really that's what sets us apart from other kinds of animals who can dichotomize, categorize based on episodic like memory. But for humans, what we are doing is using this archetypal memory to enable this abstract grouping of different kinds of plants and animals and to reorganize those abstract groups um, among many different individuals, right? Many different people. Okay, it goes on. The shift from episodic like to mimetic or archetypal memory also reflects a shift from recognition of broad use categories and similarity judgments to something resembling what Berlin, the researcher, Atran, the researcher, and others call natural classification, and an ability to infer properties of one type of organism on the basis of physical similarity to another. In other words, classification reduces the thought load, expedites new learning, and allows inference. For example, if plant A has property B, and if plant A is similar to plant C, then it's likely also to share property B, e.g., or be edible, toxic, or useful in some other way. So what this is saying is that we have to our advantage this like the recognition of similarity, the judgment, oh, this thing is like this other thing that I know, Therefore, it must fit into the same category. This is really simplifying. It's really a lot more efficient than needing to create an individual story about each individual thing that we encounter. We can also see how that's derived directly from relevance, as in the um, the inferences that we draw about what something is are really based on the inferences that are relevant to draw. So, as in the useful information that is useful to remember about like plants that we encounter is what's relevant about them, right? And if the same things are relevant, then we're going to infer the same judgments. We're going to put plants, for example, in the same categories based on use, based on their relevance. It goes on. Similarity judgments can be based on morphological similarity or ecological similarity. Thus, if X is in flower, then Y will be in fruit. Yeah, as in you can recognize simply like the time of something, as in things don't have to have the same have exactly the same use. You can recognize or classify based on, oh, when X plant is doing this thing, then this other plant is going to be doing this other thing, and we know that. It's a kind of knowledge that's also about like simplifying, classifying based on categories. So it's kind of associative thought or pattern recognition in nature that we can see. Again, it's a way of organizing our natural knowledge based on patterns. The same kind of reasoning is found in both folk biology and social cognition. What does this mean? Storing knowledge as causal hypotheses is efficient because humans do not have sufficient memory to make the right responses by induction alone, especially where they're relying on oral culture and limited division of labor. So what this is saying is that associative reasoning is efficient. When we store our knowledge of the natural world based on inference by similarity judgments, this saves us from having to create a new story, new knowledge about everything that we encounter. Okay, two more shorter paragraphs in this section about memory. It says, essential element of mimetic thinking, what I was talking about earlier as archetypal memory, but um, mimetic basically refers to a meme, right? Like a unit of knowledge rather than the direct episode of engaging with something. It's like the general principles that we derive from that, and it's about that. So mimetic thinking has to do with the associations between different categories rather than direct episodes of nature, right? So essential element of mimetic thinking as applied to natural history intelligence is a universal concept of basic category or essence applied to all biological types. For example, dog or cat or willow or oak. So this is often defined as described as a species concept. So the notion of a basic biological category was early identified in both anthropology and psychology, based on a kind of cognitive simplification through which living objects of sufficient similarity were recognized as being the same natural kind. It's difficult to imagine the concept of shared basic category, except when linked to proto-linguistic mental representations and proto-names comprising arbitrary tokens standing for something else, or perhaps onomatopoeia. Okay, what does this mean? It's talking about this central element of mimetic thinking, thinking in terms of memes. And it has to do with the emergence of these category structures, these ways of classifying things together, this way of saying, not just relying on an individual episode, an individual memory, but grouping the distilled essence of different memories into a kind of gist or into a kind of archetypal memory. But then we saw that this kind of natural classification based in different types, right, is drawn from inference of the relevant properties of things. So it's a kind of the efficiency of associative thought recognizing these patterns, making these similarity judgments by classifying things into groups. It's a way of radically simplifying the complexity of the natural world into categories that are easier to relate to because of their simplicity, right? It's so we don't have to get to know each new thing completely. We can relate with our categories. And what this is saying is that there seem to be categories that emerge naturally, like again, Viveki talked about this. For example, this seemingly essence of a category like dog or cat or tree, they seem to derive, like for example, give you a brief example of like there are many different kinds of cats, like lions and tigers and house cats and so on. But we don't think, oh, look, the feline, right? We think, oh, look, the cat, because that's the relevant level of classification. Um, and that would be going down to the specific as well. Like um, we don't say, oh, look, the CMEs, which is a more specific. We say, oh, look, the cat, because that's the most relevant level of classification. And so what this was really saying is that this classification, this natural taxonomizing of the natural world, this categorizing, it's extremely efficient way of relating with the natural world. And it seems to map directly over to our archetypal memory, which is also efficient. So when we recognize things as being the same, then we don't have to go through the complex process of discovering what something is. So I think, especially when we see from Nassim Taleb, the book Anti-Fragile, we see that efficiency is in a trade-off relationship with resiliency. And what we're going to see is that this, again, the capacity of our social cognition to reorganize knowledge. We're talking here about how do we make these classifications in the first place. But the key ability is going to be the capacity to socially reorganize what things are as our as what's relevant about them changes. So that it's not just about efficiency, but it's about creating resilient social cognition, a resilient group. Okay, final paragraph here. It says, experience of their own bodies enabled early humans to model the world around them and to understand inferentially how the bodies of other organisms worked. The hands, in particular, served not merely as sensory and motor organs, but as a strong model for binary strategies in dividing up the natural world through incipient naming. The introduction of proto-names for categories meant that while cognitive prototypes might still serve as the main way by which members of a category were identified, the act of sharing through language meant that boundaries around categories needed to be agreed, and this had to be based on a rudimentary scheme of distinctive features like color, shape, size, smell, and taste. So again, a lot of information was just presented in that paragraph. It's talking about how our modeling of the natural world, our classifying, our taxonomizing, our categorizing derives directly from our embodied experience. And moreover, we understood the world. We connected to that world via embodied resonance. We mapped the pattern within our body onto the patterns of other bodies that we see in nature. Quote, experience of their own bodies enabled early humans to model the world around them and to understand inferentially by inference how the bodies of other organisms worked. The hands, in particular, served not merely as sensory and motor organs, but as strong but it's a strong model for binary strategies of dividing up the world through incipient naming. Yeah, so what we can see here is that our language is really tied to the body. We classify and taxonomize in terms of the body. Um, we can also see that these initial categories seem directly related to like the primary features of something's relevance. Um, but that it's not just about finding the what the essence of a category. It's also about renegotiating the boundaries between different categories. And that has to be shared, right? It has to be shared through language. And so we can see in particular like this, it was the development of the hands, we can see, that really allowed this capacity to classify in terms of like, is this, in what way is this relevant? Like, in what way can this be used, right? What kind of a thing is this? But that has to do with our hands, right? Our ability to manipulate and move around objects in the world. But this capacity to renegotiate the boundaries between categories, to talk about what things mean to the whole group, has to be based on a shared sense, shared features. Um, and it's in relation to um, the whole body, not just the hands, not just how to manipulate and move around objects, but it's about how what something is. Um, so this capacity to remap, to renegotiate, to reweave our stories about what things are. This seems to be really core to human cognition. Okay, again, I'm going to pause this here and come back to the next section as I keep trying to answer the question of what is it about our human cognition that is unique. Some of the insights we had here were it's again this what is it about our organizing of our natural knowledge? Well, it's shared. And so we not only have these this archetypal kind of memory where we remember the essence or the distillation, the gist, rather than individual episodes. This seems uniquely human. Um, we can judge based on inference. We have this kind of associative thinking where we have these similarity judgments where we put something into the same category because it's very simple to do it that way, sufficient energetically. But we also have this social capacity, not just to classify, not just to organize the natural world in this way, but to, through social cognition, renegotiate the boundaries between different categories so that we don't fall into the trap of the binary thinking that seems to derive directly from our hand-based manipulation of the objective world, this left hemispheric way of relating. So we could say that the distributed cognition of our collective intelligence enables the right hemispheric ways of being, ways of experiencing the world to govern and guide the left hemisphere in its organizing and classifying. And we're going to continue into talking about language, particularly naming and symbolic culture when I come back.